Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Glad to have you here like always. In today's video, we're going to be talking about mealworms. Now, if you don't know what mealworms are, these are small insects that I offer the finches in order to get them excited about breeding or excited about feeding their own chicks. Many of these bird species in the wild rely heavily on insects in order to successfully raise a clutch of chicks. And many of them in captivity need that extra stimulation, and they can't get it from their seeds. They can't get it from egg food. And the only way of giving them that extra stimulation is by offering them a source of live food, whether that's crickets, mealworms, fruit flies, termites, whatever it is that you want to offer them. This is something that's going to help them get through that initial barriers of being in captivity and not wanting to raise your chicks. So your success or your chances at success are increased once you start to offer these live foods. And one of my favorite ones, one of the easiest ones that I offer is obviously the mealworms. Now, personally, I like to offer the mini mealworms. These are the smallest size available in mealworms, and they're usually 1/4 inch. Now, mealworms come in a variety of sizes. You can get them from the biggest ones to the smallest ones, being the 1/4 inch ones. And these are going to be the perfect ones for these African waxbills and even other species of finches that are not so much insectivorous, like for example, Goldians, mass finches, owl finches, parrot finches, and so on. These are all species that, even though they're not highly insectivorous like the African waxbills, they still will go ahead and eat them, especially during the breeding season if they have chicks. So breeding mealworms doesn't require a science degree. It's very simple and straightforward. These little bugs are very simple to breed. All you need to do is obviously buy the initial ones that you need, whether that's you buy the beetles or whether you buy the mini little mealworms already, and you have to wait for them to go through their cycle in order to start breeding. So if you just buy the mealworms, you're going to have to put them in a container. Obviously, these mealworms are going to eat something. And what is it that they eat? Well, they eat oatmeal. This is the preferred thing that I like to put inside of that container so that they can eat this. This is where they will go through their process of turning into a pupae, and they'll go into the process of turning into the beetle later on, and so on. So I put them inside of this container that is filled with oatmeal. And those oats, what I do is I crumble it. I put it in the food processor so that it is very fine. There's a specific reason why I do this. The reason why I make it very fine is because later on, you're going to have a very hard time separating these mealworms from the oats if it's not fine like this, because I have to put it through a sifter. And the only way of getting that oat to fall through the sifter is if it's finely graded into like a dust. Now, the mealworms are going to eat this oat. This is what's going to keep them alive, but they also need moisture. And the best way of offering them moisture is through certain vegetables, like for example, carrots, kale, or lettuce will work for moisture. Personally, my favorite one is kale. I just chop up a bunch of little pieces, throw it in there, and they're good to go. Now, the place that I keep them in, it has 3 different containers. The top container is for the beetles. This is where all the beetles are at. This is where they're going to mate. Now, the section that holds the beetles, the oats that I put in there are not finely graded or finely chopped up. The reason I do this is because I want the female to lay her eggs, and as the eggs fall into the oats, they start to go under and they go towards the bottom section. The problem is that if you finally grind up the oats where the beetles are at, when the female lays her eggs, it is much easier for the beetles or other beetles within this enclosure to find those eggs and eat them. These tend to be carnivorous, so they will eat the mealworms and they will eat the eggs, so you have to continuously separate them. The bottom container is where I start to separate those eggs. So after about a week or 2 of them being in there together, the beetles being in that top container, I pass the entire substance of everything that's in that container through a sifter. And what will happen is all the eggs will fall through the little holes of the sifter while the oats and the beetles stay on the top portion of the sifter. And then all those eggs that I collect, which you're not going to be able to see because those things are microscopic, I put them in the bottom or middle container. And this is where I start to transfer every single week or every other week. I start to transfer all the time all these eggs that these beetles are continuously laying. After some time, you're going to notice that in your middle container, you're going to have a bit of movement. And those are the little tiny mini mealworms that are hatching out of those eggs. And they're going to start to go through their process. Over her lifespan, a female will, on average, lay about 500 eggs. After 4 to 19 days, the eggs will hatch. Now, this hatching will depend greatly on the temperature. The hotter it is in your area, the faster these eggs are going to hatch. The lower the temperature, the longer they may take to hatch. That's why it shows 4 to 19 days for that hatch period for the eggs. Now, during the larval stage, the mealworms feed on vegetations and dead insects and molt between each larval stage. After the final molt, they pupate. The new pupae is whitish and turns brown over time. After 3 to 30 days, depending on an environmental condition such as temperature, it emerges as an adult beetle. So eventually, in that middle container or the bottom container, because I have 2 of them continuously running at all time, you will notice that from time to time, you will have these small little beetles that will pop up. Just grab them and you move them to the top container. And that's what I do, and I continue that cycle. Every week or every 2 weeks, collect the eggs, put them in the bottom or middle container, and so on. That way I have continuous supplies of mini mealworms to feed the birds, and they love it. Now, which species can you give these mealworms to? Well, pretty much any species of finch will accept it, but it may take some time for them to get used to this new live food, especially if they haven't ever had it. So one of the things that I like to do in order to get the birds a little bit more enthusiastic about going towards this new source of live food is offering it to them in a location where they're used to receiving some sort of treat, like, for example, egg food. This is something that birds love. So in the same container where you put egg food, put the mealworms in there. And then you're going to notice that they're more likely to go to that container to start trying them out. Give them some time. It may take 2, 3, 4, 5 days, even a week for them to get used to this new live food. And you don't have to offer a lot. Per cage, for the species that do require this live food, I only give about 10 mini mealworms. So as you can see, it's not a lot. It's just enough to get them into that stimulation of wanting to start breeding. Now, once they have chicks, you do want to offer a higher supply of mealworms in order to get them to successfully raise their own chicks. And during that time, usually I offer it about 3 times a day. I'll give it to them early in the morning, I'll give it to them in the afternoon, and around evening time, I'll offer their last bit of mealworms. And this is enough to keep them encouraged between egg food, mealworms, sprouted seeds, and other sources of protein to raise their own chicks without issues. Now, you're probably wondering, why go with the mini mealworms? Can't I just pick the bigger ones? Well, you can, but in the past, I've noticed that the birds tend to like the smaller mealworms. It's easier for many of these species to consume. And I've had problems in the past with, for example, the red-cheeked cordon blues in the outdoor aviary. One of the problems that I started to encounter with the bigger mealworms was that the males and the females would go up to them. They would kill the mealworm by squishing the head. They would then suck out the insides of that mealworm. They would bring that exoskeleton into their nest and feed it whole to the chick. Then I started to have problems where I had a couple of chicks that would die because the mealworm would impact in their crop. They weren't able to process it at a very early age, and they would end up dying. So it turned into a problem. If I didn't offer them the live food source to encourage them to feed the chicks would die. But then if I offered them these bigger size mealworms, they would feed them to the chicks whole, and the chicks would get an impacted crop with that mealworm, and then it would end up dying anyway. So as you can see, it was a big problem to have. So what I ended up doing was I decided to go down to these smaller size mealworms, and it worked great. This is also a great insect to give because you don't have to worry about it getting away or causing damage in your home. A specific insect that I love to give the outdoor birds is termites. They love the termites, especially the African species. These birds rely heavily on termites in the wild, so they know what it is. Once they see it, even if they're not wild caught, even if they are cage bred or aviary bred or first, second, third generation, they have that instinct of knowing this is something good to eat. So they love it, they go for it. But it's not reliable. It's not a constant food source that you can collect and find easily. You can't buy it online as far as I'm concerned. So I physically have to go out and get this in the woods and collect it. This is time consuming. It's very difficult at times and frustrating to find them. So it's a very hard food source to continuously give. So having something like this where you can just buy it online, cultivate it very easily inside of your bird room and offer it to all of your birds is a great source of protein. You can't go wrong with it. And if it gets away from you, it's not going to cause any damage to your house. Unlike a termite, the last thing that you want is a couple of termites loose in your home building a colony. All right, guys. Well, I hope that you have enjoyed this video. Like always, if you did, remember to hit the thumbs up, like and subscribe, and we will see each other in the next one.